Hello everybody. So this video will hopefully be even shorter than the other cognitive dissonance video, but this video is all about how cognitive dissonance can lead to attitude change through our desire to reduce dissonance by justifying our efforts. So in general, we tend to think that a person only really puts a lot of effort and energy into something if they really enjoy it. And especially among us Americans who tend to downplay the influence that others might have on us. You know, most of us don't tend to think that others have as much of an influence on us as they do. So we tend to think that any person who expends a lot of energy or effort into something, they weren't necessarily doing that because other people might have been encouraging them to do so much as they are motivated to engage in all that effort because they enjoyed or wanted to do that thing. Okay? Now, what this means is that when we tend to expend a lot of energy or effort in something, even when we're doing so for minimal reasons, we then experience inconsistency because we're putting a lot of effort into something that we don't really care that much about. So in an effort to reduce the dissonance, we justify our effort. We change how we think about that thing that we put a lot of energy into. So for example, you know, a real life example, it would not be uncommon for people who have joined groups, let's say Greek fraternities, that required, difficult application processes to be more devoted to their fraternities than people who joined fraternities that didn't require as difficult application processes. So, and why would people join fraternities in the first place? Well, maybe you want more friends. Maybe, you're going to a larger university like an OU or a UT or a VOSU or an OSU, and you see that it's just kind of the thing that people do. People who come to school, they join a Greek fraternity, so it's just kind of the thing that people do. So you're setting out to join a fraternity for kind of, social influence. You're being affected by the norm that is set at that university. But again, most people tend to underestimate the influence that those social norms might have on them. So then, for those that join groups that have difficult application procedures, they may be asked to stay up late, do all sorts of embarrassing things, do all these activities that are difficult and require a lot of energy and investment in order to join the fraternity. Well, again, remember that for most of us, we don't think that people engage in a lot of effort unless they really like the thing they're doing. But a person might have started to join that fraternity just because it was the thing people did, not because they really cared about the fraternity, not necessarily because they wanted to be a part of that fraternity, but because it's just the thing that people do, and they were influenced by social influence, which we all are. But again, we tend to underestimate it. So you have a situation where you have a person who's joined a fraternity, they're going through this very difficult application process, and then they realize, hey, maybe I didn't really care about this all that much. Why am I doing this then? And then, for some, they might say, well, I do care about it. So what's happened is that they've experienced an inconsistency. I mean, putting a lot of effort into something that I don't really care about. So that's inconsistent. That creates cognitive dissonance, that the effort that they've expended, I'm putting a lot of effort into joining this thing, is inconsistent with their attitude towards the thing that they're putting any energy into, joining the fraternity. So that's inconsistent. So they have to justify that effort. Well, if they can't externally justify it, maybe there's a lot of pressure on, let's say that you're a legacy of OU and you were always in some fraternity. I don't know the names, but insert random Greek fraternity. Let's say your parents or your dad was a legacy at that fraternity. All right, and so there's a lot of pressure on you from your dad to join that fraternity. Well, in that situation, it's fairly easily to externally justify. I'm going through this effort because of my dad. All right, but if you don't have some source that you can, some external source that you can justify your behavior with, you then have to internally justify. So now you're still faced with the inconsistency between all the effort that you're putting into joining a group and your original lackluster evaluation of that group. So you're inconsistent. So in order to reduce that dissonance, you change your attitude towards that group. Obviously, yes, you could change the behavior. You could quit applying to be in that fraternity, but there are other mechanisms that kind of keep us in something once we've started. But to reduce that dissonance, you then change your attitude towards the group, making you develop a more positive attitude, changing your attitude from neutral to positive, changing your attitude about that group from neutral to positive. Okay? So this effort justification process can find its way into a lot of things. And typically when you find that there are among groups that require more difficult entrance activities, you find greater devotion to those groups. You probably wouldn't be surprised to, it probably wouldn't be difficult to find, someone who went to college in the 70s when hazing wasn't as tightly restricted, and they who are more devoted to their fraternities than members from the 2000s, from fraternity members from the 2000s when hazing requirements were less, or were more regulated, so they weren't allowed to do as many difficult things. Now, we've found this exact effect in research. So Aronson and colleagues found that when they had participants go do something kind of embarrassing in order to join a group versus something mildly uncomfortable versus nothing at all, though those who had to do the embarrassing thing tended to evaluate the behavior of the group that they were joining better. So let's get a little bit more specific very quickly though. So they had participants join a discussion group, and the discussion group, they said because we wanted an interesting discussion topic, the discussion topic was sex. So in one condition, they had the person who was applying to be in the discussion group say some embarrassing things. So some sex-related, very embarrassing things. They might be embarrassing to say in front of someone you don't know. All right. I won't repeat them here. You can go look up the article. It's Aronson. I forget the second author, but I think it was published in the late 50s, 57, 59, something like that. Anyway, hold on. Sorry. We had a passerby who I'm pretty sure was louder than me. That's difficult. Anyway, and now I'm thrown off. Yeah, right. So some of them had to do something very embarrassing. Say those embarrassing sexual words. In the mildly embarrassing condition, they were required to say words that were sex-related, but they weren't terribly embarrassing. Like, I remember virgin was one of them. And then in the control condition, they didn't have to say anything. Really, all they had to do is say whether or not they were willing to talk about sex. And then once they said yes, they were allowed in the group. Now, all people in all conditions, the severe, the mild, and the control, all of them were told because they hadn't done the reading material required to engage in the current discussion, they could only listen. So they were also told that the whole discussion group talks to each other via an intercom, so because that makes the conversation less embarrassing. So everybody listened to this discussion. It was a pre-recorded discussion. Part of that explanation was to keep them from trying to contribute to it. So everybody heard the same conversation, and then everybody was asked to rate the conversation and the members of the group on several dimensions. And then they summed those dimensions to get the participants' overall evaluation of that group. So you got how people in the severe condition evaluated the group. So remember, the people in the severe condition, they had to say very embarrassing sexual terms, sexual words. I won't even say that I use the word terms, but terms is probably a little too savvy for it. They're slang words, words that were again, that could be potentially embarrassing if you said them in front of someone you didn't know. Then you had the people in the mild condition who evaluated the discussion, and the people in the discussion, and then the people in the control. And what they found is that people who had been required to say the embarrassing words, they evaluated the discussion more positively than the people in the other two conditions. So again, here we have effort justification. The people in the condition where they were required to say these very embarrassing words, they're expending more effort to join this discussion group than are the people in the mild or control conditions. So again, here we have effort to join a group that they may not have had much of a desire to join in the first place, but because they can't externally justify it, I guess I didn't mention this, but the experimenters made it explicitly clear that they did not have to say the embarrassing words, but if they didn't, they couldn't join the group. So they made the decision to say those embarrassing words. So they've engaged in this effort, they can't externally justify it, and it's inconsistent with their original evaluation of the group. So what do? They feel dissonant, so they justify the effort by changing the attitude towards the group. And that affects their evaluations towards the group and the discussion, making them now consistent. All right? So that, my friends, is how dissonance can motivate justifying our efforts. All right, and that's what I wanted to talk about for this brief video. As per the usual, if you have any questions, send them my way, but that's it for this video over effort justification.